All right. Well, welcome. We are here with the lovely Kristy, who's going to speak to us today about astrology from her lens. And I am Michelle Hirschman, for all those out there watching us today. I am from Hirschman Clinical Services. We do coaching work with folks with mental health addictions and eating disorders. We also help folks map out holistic healing plans. So we are doing these webinars every Monday and bringing in holistic healers of all modalities. These are great supports and services that can be used as adjuncts to whatever else you might be using, whether it's therapy, psychiatry, all of the lovely supports out there. These are just great additional supports that can be helpful in healing. So I hope you'll also listen to some of the other lovely webinars that we are hosting on Mondays. With that said, I want to jump in and spend the rest of our time talking about astrology. So Darcy, can you please lead us to Kristy's bio and let us know more about her?
Absolutely. Hi, all. I'm Darcy, coach and director of outreach with Hirschman Clinical Services, and I'm so excited for today and honored to introduce you, Kristy. So Kristy Estelle is an astrologer. She's a certified meditation instructor, pharmacist, and spiritual life coach who's been studying sun sign astrology for over 30 years. I have never heard this combination of background, experience, and education. So I'm even more excited to hear about some of your backstory. Kristy has a focus on the divine feminine and intuitive astrology, and she brings clarity and validity. Her aim is to bring clarity and validity to your soul's blueprint using astrology, and specifically focuses on life purpose and soul intention. You can find her on different social media where she offers free daily astro minutes, which can be really helpful in those days where things just seem to be going a little bit awry or off and you want more encouragement or insight. You can also find her on Instagram, and we'll have her info in the bio. So if you want to stop by and get daily energies from her, you know where to find her. Kristy's also written 5 books under the pen name Estelle Kristy and Kristy Estelle, including Uplifting Astrology, Ditch Anxiety and Find Peace, as well as a series inspired by A Course in Miracles. She's going to share with us today about how astrology and the divine feminine can add value to your life, however you identify in the world, and what we can look forward to in the coming seasons. So I'm going to pass it over for an awesome conversation with Michelle and Kristy now.
Yay.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. I'm so very excited. And I had the opportunity to have a reading. I usually will work with, somebody, whoever I kind of bring on, and it was totally different than I've ever had any kind of reading. So I got some like really amazing insights about myself. So thank you. And let's just kind of jump in. One of the things that I find so fascinating about you, Kristy, is your background, like what you bring, like, because a lot of times people are like, oh, astrologers are hokey pokey, and yet your career path actually was, you weren't like born and like you didn't start out as an astrologer. I mean, you've always had the gifts, but I'd love for you to share a little bit about your kind of career shifts and history there.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you having me. I do have kind of a strange background for someone that is involved in spirituality and mysticism. Did not grow up necessarily around anyone else that was a medium or a psychic. I wish I had, but I did grow up around some really wonderful people. I always had a connection to spirituality, but it was more traditional. And so my background is this. I became a pharmacist, and I did that for about 10, 15 years. Decided that I was getting a little burnt out. And maybe many of your practitioners and listeners can relate to this. In the healing fields, I think it's very easy to do that because you get into the healing professions because you care about people and you want to interact with people. And I just didn't feel like I was getting the opportunity to do that. So I switched careers again. I do have an Aries moon for those of you that do know astrology, so that makes sense. Wanting to be inspired by something unique and different. and became a librarian, health sciences librarian. So I did research for doctors, physicians, etc. I did find I continued to have the anxiety and the stress. So that's when I began a meditation practice. And I started my meditation practice by breathing in my car in between traffic lights, because that was the time that I had. So that's when I wrote my first book, which was Ditch Anxiety and Find Peace, because I felt like busy people needed an outlet for meditation, some kind of way to connect back to themselves and to their authentic voice. And for me, meditation was that, but I didn't have 20 minutes every day necessarily to meditate. So that's why I wrote that book. Shortly after that, the pandemic hit and my anxiety racketed up again. And that's when I started to listen a little bit more to astrology. I'd been looking at astrology for over 30 years, annoyingly asking people when their birthdays were, or eavesdropping really and finding out. So I knew something about sun sign astrology. The cute story is when I was 12, I went to the library, and every summer I would read up on a particular topic. And one summer was the summer of astrology. And I've been asking people what their birthdays are ever since. But, after the pandemic, I needed a little bit of support and validity, a little greater support. And so I started to listen to more and more astrologers. After that, I found it gave me a lot of comfort, and it made a lot of sense to me, maybe my mathematical scientific brain. And then also just felt like a warm blanket, something I was returning to after I'd been there before. And joined a spiritual community. People started to ask me to do readings, and I've been doing those ever since. So that's kind of a long overview. It's been a journey. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
No, I just love it. I love that you have that kind of unique twist in what you're doing. What who do you like work like who's the best person to work with you? Like what I guess well there's kind of two questions. One is, who are the best people to work with you? And what if someone has never had an astrological reading and they're like, well, why would I get it? Like, I don't want to know about the future. Like, what do you mean? What would you tell them? Like, how could it be beneficial?
So that's a great question. I would say astrology is a tool, just like any other tool. So just like, practitioners, everybody has a lot of tools in their tool belt, right? For some people, that's meditation. For me, it's astrology. So the first thing would be just being open. So the ideal person would be somebody that's open to learning about astrology, that thinks it might have some validity for them, that perhaps part of it resonates for them. I'm not big into forcing astrology down anybody's neck that's not interested in connecting with that part of themselves. Um, and I would say if, someone that says, why would I want to get a reading? For me, it provides clarity and validity. So I think of your chart as your soul's blueprint. So the stars were in a particular alignment whenever you were born. It's very unique to you. It's your unique signature. It's what I believe your soul signed up to engage with on a conscious level as you came into the universe. However, I am a big, huge proponent of free will astrology. And what I mean by that is you get to choose how you interact with those energies. So to me, astrology is not prescriptive. Like, Michelle, you're a Libra. I can see it on your sweatshirt. So you definitely must have trouble making decisions. I think you get to choose how you engage with that. Like, no, I'm actually really diplomatic, Kristy, because that's the energy that I've chosen to interact with. I host great groups just like this one, and I build community because I find the harmony and the connection between people. So those are two different ways you can look at the same astrological signature. So if you're interested about your life purpose, about direction to point you in, I think a reading with me is good. If you are interested in finding out what your soul signed up for, perhaps whenever you came in, and what you've done with that, that's really a good connection for me. Very resonant.
Nice. Um, there's so many different astrologers out there. I'm wondering what makes you a bit more unique. I know you've talked about this kind of feminine lens. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Absolutely. Well, number one, I do think some people do what's called mundane astrology, and that doesn't mean that it's simple or mundane at all. Just basically means they take a look at predictive astrology, what might be happening in the future, and they use a ton of great tools to do that. They're amazing at it. But for me, again, it's more about energy and consciousness. So it's all about what you're choosing to interact with in those planets and mapping out, perhaps together, the best way to move forward to capitalize on those strengths and weaknesses for you personally. And I call that divine feminine astrology. I'm also intuitive. So I don't necessarily go through in a particular line item format with your astrological chart. This is your sun, this is your moon, this is your rising. We might touch on all of those things. We might touch on some of the aspects. But I actually ask your guides, your angels, whatever you're comfortable with, what they want me to take a look at in your chart. And that's what we talk about. So to me, there's an energetic signature that lights up whenever I see your chart. And there's definitely points that stand out to me. You can call it a gut feeling, intuition, you can call it observance. But those are the points that I feel like your guides are telling me to talk with you about so that we can have a conversation. Doesn't mean you can't ask questions. I think also the dialogue's really important in a chart reading so that the client gets what they're looking for, gets the questions that they want answered, and also allows, your higher divine connection to come in and speak to you about the things that are important for you to know in that moment.
So a lot of times I'll get people who will say something like, so you're not going to tell me like when I'm going to die, right? Or like scary stuff. It sounds like what you're saying is you intuitively know and ask guides and spirit guides what that individual needs in the moment.
Yes, very much so. And again, I'm not predictive because I believe that you have free will. So you can mobilize those energies a little bit differently. Pluto's a planet that they talk a lot about with death and endings, but it can be death or an ending. It could be you just decide to move on from your job. It could be, a loved one transitions on. So lots of different ways that you can interpret and decide at a conscious level how you interact with those energies. If that makes sense.
So like if we often Darcy and I'll get clients that get really stuck, they'll ruminate about something in particular, especially like with eating disorders, and they're just like, and they don't even have the insight to understand like why they can't get better. Do you feel like astrology could be something that could bring insights or help them get unstuck in some ways?
In my experience, yes. Sometimes I see some clients that have some pretty traumatic roles, and there's nothing better than a great psychotherapist for helping through those energies. But there's also, I think, a comfort and validity in the fact that someone born with certain planets in your 8th house or your 12th house, for example, might indicate that these are conscious energies that they can engage with in different ways. There's also what we call aspects. So every aspect has its traits that are strengthening and traits you have to work a little bit more at. So maybe it might inform, okay, you have something in the 8th house, for example. So a great way to work with that energy is to work on self-worth, which is the opposite house. So self-development. And I think therapists are great at pointing to, those practical tools that can help with that. But having a good idea and feeling perhaps like for this, I guess I would say like, maybe not this particular situation, but definitely I have the strength and the capability to interact with the situation a little bit differently from an empowered place rather than one that feels victimized, which is completely understandable, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So I think it'd be really cool to kind of jump in to seeing like how your work unravels, like with maybe one of the people that entered today. But can you maybe just share with us like what someone should expect in a session with you who's never done anything like this to ease their anxiety a little bit?
So I do ask for the client's date of birth, place of birth, and time of birth. A lot of people talk about the fact that they don't have their correct time of birth. It really affects how the planetary signatures will show up in your life, where the houses talk about the environment, how this practically shows up in your everyday experience. But you can still run a chart without the exact time and talk about the planetary conscious energies and how they interact. So those things are important first. Some people actually get that information also from the hospital that they were born at, so that they can have the exact time so that they can line up those houses. So once I get that information, I take a look and do a little bit of research. I try not to go into too much depth because, again, I really want the experience to be that your guides and your interests guide what we talk about in that day. And that's that intuitive piece that comes in. So I try not to be exhaustive with what I'm researching before you come in, but I do a little bit of research. Especially on some, less common aspects that might come up. But once we have a reading, I follow a similar format. Like I said, I have a scientific background. So whenever I started to get into this, my guides told me to actually find a stone for people. And I thought, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about stones. I don't know anything about crystals. They're lovely. My husband's a geologist. That's great. He loves stones. But that's what they told me to do. And they would send me just a mental kind of image of a stone. So I pick up a stone. Usually that's something that that person needs, maybe for the next 3 to 4 weeks, something to carry around them. From there, I ask if there are any messages that are outright. I don't hear like the voice of God. It's more of a knowing for me of some messages that your guides would have for you. So I relay those, and then we get into reading the chart. And basically, things just stand out for me. There's usually one planetary signature that just speaks to me. Like your Saturn is speaking to me right now. These are the things I see. Do they resonate with you? And what's interesting is that for some people, these are energies that they've worked through all of their lives. Like I've really made a conscious effort to try to engage with self-development, for example. And they might have a lot in their first house. So we talk about that. And for a lot of people, what I get is that it's very confirming for them of the path that they've taken and the choices that they've made, the things that they've chosen to engage with, including the struggles and sometimes the most wonderful things that they've had happen in their lives. And then there are other aspects that indicate kind of like the soul's path, the things that their soul kind of consistently wanted to engage with. I usually talk about it like a muscle, right? We're all born with essentially the same muscles, but we get to decide which ones we develop. And it's the same with the planetary signatures, the planets that you're born with, the stars. You get to decide which ones you develop. It just might take a few more reps, depending on what shows up in your chart. I also really like the dialogue in a chart reading. If something doesn't resonate with you, I'm always like, speak up. Could be my humanity being projected onto you. And so I like to know that right away. Or it could be it's a message for you later. We record the readings. I always recommend that you go back and listen to them 3 to 6 months later. There might be a message for you. And I do also find that you get the most from a reading whenever you ask a lot of questions. And that way you know that you're getting from the reading what you need to get.
All right. Well, are you open to maybe jumping in with either Emily or Darcy today, or both?
Sure.
Who's going to be brave? Who wants to go first?
I'll share my chart. I am not shy.
Where do we start, Kristy?
So another good thing for your listeners to know is if you are interested in just kind of starting out in astrology and doing some charts, taking a look at some charts, I know that they can kind of seem like Greek whenever you're first looking at a chart. But if you go to astro.com, ASTRO.com, this is a site that's been around for over 20 years. It has some astrologers that have been around for a long time. They're very reputable. The site's very reputable. You can create a guest account, or you can go in and create your individual account, so you can go back and look, and it allows you to put in your friends, your clients, all of those accounts as well in a secure space behind a firewall too. So that's usually where I recommend that you start. And if you want, I can certainly, Darcy, if you want to go there and put your chart in, astro.com, or I can share my screen and show you how to go through that step by step.
Actually, it might be cool just for you to do it anyway for the viewers' purposes. Emily, maybe you can do yours while she's doing hers too, in case we get to have enough time for both. That would be great.
Yeah.
Oh, so I think you should be able to share. Let's see. I think it's already set for you to share. Yeah.
Oh, everybody's seeing my screen okay?
I see it.
All right. And I don't want to give out too much of your personal information, Darcy, but basically this is what astro.com looks like. And you can go to charts and calculations. You can do this on your phone as well. I use the extended chart selection. You can just get an overview using the chart drawing, using the ascendant. And it looks like this. You can either do a guest profile, or you can log into your site. Of course, I have a profile, so I can go in here. Darcy, I don't want to give out all of your personal information.
I actually put it in the chat.
All right.
Which people may be able to see that anyway, which is, again, I'm not shy, but there you go.
All right. There we go. So you create a new profile by clicking on add, or you can add your profile in here. And they do your sex at birth, essentially. Darcy, you can double check me to make sure I'm putting in the information correctly too.
I think you're the years off.
Yeah.
Chat real quick.
1986.
I made you way older than you are, and you look so young. It's ridiculous.
Like now it says 2019, so technology's just being funny.
There we go. 2086. All right. Actually, probably could have just done this behind the scenes and then pulled that up. That way your information isn't completely out there in the world.
I think it's probably helpful for some, like, I know I learn visually, so even seeing you go in there, it makes it less intimidating. So I appreciate that you did that. I'm sure I'm not alone there. Some of that.
Yeah, then people are so overwhelmed, like, oh my God, I don't want to fill out all this paperwork, where it's like actually pretty simple. It's just you're putting in your birthday.
And Darcy, it makes sense that you're wanting to see all of this, given that you're a June 16th birthday, but we'll talk about that in a second. So everybody, you can just use all of the defaults if you want. Every astrologer I know has a particular house system that they love. And I've listened to lots of webinars, done a lot of research on why you would choose one over the other. There are certain house systems, which is that big circle with all the pie pieces in it. Sometimes the pie pieces are even, sometimes they are bigger or shorter than others. And it depends on whether or not they're trying to use an actual map of the sky, or whether they're just basically evening out all of the pie pieces. And everybody has a preference. Mostly it's because of who they learned astrology from, is what I found. So if you find that you have particular planets or aspects right on the pie pieces, and we'll see that in a second, you might take on characteristics of either environment or either sign. People talk about cusps a lot, so the date in between two signs. And a lot of times that means that you can take on characteristics of being a Gemini and a Taurus, for example. So I do a lot. You can just go straight in from here. You don't have to add in any other aspects and show your chart. So it can be as simple as that, and you get this map with all of your different pie pieces, which is what I call these little pizza pie pieces. And essentially, these are the different houses, which is the environment, the consciousness, the conscious energy of that planet shows up in. I do like to add in a couple of extra things, but I recommend whenever you're first starting that maybe you just start there. And don't add in all of the extra things that can, sometimes be a little confusing or a little overwhelming at first. But that's the beauty of astrology. There's over 3,000 different aspects. So I always consider myself to still be a learner. And so don't feel intimidated if you feel like it's overwhelming is another piece of advice that I would give. Just learn as your interest provokes you, one thing at a time, because it is easy to get overwhelmed. So this is a Darcy's chart. What's nice is they automatically tell you, your sun sign in the upper left-hand corner. There are 12 sun signs and 12 houses. So you've probably heard of sun signs before. I believe that's your conscious energy. So that is the main energy your consciousness wanted to express as it comes into this lifetime. And then you have these 12 pie pieces that correspond loosely to those sun signs. And they are the environment that that conscious energy expresses in. And they each individually mean different things. So house 1, for example, is personal and self-development. So for you, Darcy, your life is a journey of getting to know more information, which really supports your sun being in Gemini. So for those of you who don't know, Gemini is the sign of finding out information. There is usually a thirst for information and for learning things. And yours is actually exalted because it's in the third pie piece, which is Gemini's natural home. So basically, you are an information lover upon an information lover. And I don't know if that's true for you or not, but that's what your chart shows. Also, an excellent communicator. So anything that you do with communication is really expressing your soul's purpose and what your soul came in here to do. If you decide to write a book, for example, that's supported for you. And what constantly points you in the direction of your life's purpose is what you call the North Node. So it's this little hat looking guy here. So that's constantly going to put you on your life's path. Some people think that it's your life's path. In the astrology that I connect with, it's more like a compass. So it's always going to point you in the right direction. If you feel like you don't know what you're going to do next, if you feel like you're not sure about the decision point that you want to make next, your compass is always going to be to learn something more about yourself. And it sounds pretty generic, but for you, it's really intense. It's at a high degree. It's at 28 degrees. So each sign goes all the way up to 29 degrees. And the higher the degree, the more that you want to express that in greater and bigger ways. Not better, just greater and bigger. Really, really important to pursue self-development to keep you on your path. And anytime you come to a choice point, that's your key to finding the next move. And I know that can be difficult for Geminis because Geminis aren't called the twins for no reason, right? There's always going to be these levels of consciousness. I think of Geminis not as two opposing voices, but almost like a consensus in your brain the whole time. Geminis tend to have very busy minds because you're constantly evaluating all of the pieces of information and trying to fit them together. Also, Geminis excel at small groups, for example. Not every Gemini is a social butterfly, despite what you might hear, but community and having a group of people that you can rely on, that you can talk to is super important. It's an air sign, so really vocalizing those things is important in some way. It can be written as well, but just communication is key. Does any of that resonate for you, Darcy?
All of it, 100%. Yeah, the quest for learning and like geeking out on things, it's just constant. How much I retain is completely different conversation, but that's not really the point.
And that usually shows up more in your ninth house. That's higher learning, that's teaching, and that's probably due to the fact that it's Uranus, which is the planet of change. So there's probably always going to be something new. There's two things in your chart that indicate that there's always going to be something new that's sparking your interest. So it's not necessarily that you aren't retaining it. It's probably that there's always something new to discover and that that's appealing for you. You've got an Aries rising too, and people with Aries rising. So your rising sign is how you see the world and how people see you. So you see the world as a new adventure, a new discovery, something new that you can discover, interact with, explore. And supporting your North Node, because they're both in Aries, is that, self-development can be that for you. It can be the newest frontier. It could be, I'm interested in human design now. I'm interested in astrology now. All of those things so that you can discover more about yourself. And the thing I'd say about that is I think there could be a tendency to maybe feel a little bit like, oh, should I be spending all of this time doing this? Well, your soul's blueprint says yes, that's actually really how you discover your path, your next steps, how you support people, how you support yourself. That way you can show up for other people that way. And if you don't have that piece of self-discovery, it's almost like there's something missing in the joy that is you. So I guess the long and short of that is go for it, girl. Discover as much as you can about yourself. Don't feel guilty about that would be my advice in any way, shape, or form. The other interesting thing a lot of astrologers, almost all astrologers, will talk about is your moon sign. And we talked a little bit about this because it's probably very applicable in the trauma field. These are subconscious energies, and these can be energies either a patient or yourself aren't necessarily aware of. So these can be things that are living in the back of your mind, can be things that traumas people have gone through and maybe haven't brought to their conscious awareness. Really, the solution in astrology is always very much probably like psychotherapy to bring those into your conscious awareness in a safe space so that you feel comforted, supported, but also are able to bring those into consciousness and use those in ways that support you in your character development rather than hindering you because you don't know that they're there. Your moon sign is, you can see it's kind of right on the edge, right? So this little blue line tells you the degree that a particular planet is, and it's right on the edge of your descendant. But it's in the 6th house. Now, I did mention before, anytime you see a planet, pardon me, or aspect that's right on the edge, you can take on characteristics of both, right? The 6th house expresses as lots of different things. Can be work, can be service. Doesn't necessarily mean you have a trauma around those things, although it can be. But it can also be where maybe something happened, like maybe your first job was terrible and you had to quit and it made an emotional impact on you. So you constantly think about that whenever you're starting a new job. So that would just be kind of a mundane example of how that might show up. It's also, though, right on this descendant, which speaks to kind of the relationships that we're releasing, can be past life relationships, especially because yours is what we call conjunct. It's right on that descendant line. You can see there's lots of aspects to it, so lots of lines. Some people call the blue lines good and the red lines bad. I call the red lines opportunities for growth. However you want to phrase it, it's fine. But, this is pretty significant being right on your descendant. If you were to believe in past lives, it could have an indication there, or more practically, like for us, perhaps even childhood experiences and relationships. Again, that you maybe had to let go. And it's at 5 degrees, which is the degree of being cerebral. So you had to think about it in a thoughtful way. And I can only imagine how that would end up being a Gemini who weighs both ends, and this being in Libra, which Michelle's a Libra. She can talk about that. But, Libras do have a tendency to weigh every option in a relationship or situation. I would say to try to find balance in a situation. They're really, really good at that. But as a moon energy, that's in the back of your mind, right? So you may not have been consciously aware of, I had to let go of this relationship to this job. I was really trying to think about that, and it took me a really long time to get through that. Because there's also an aspect to Neptune that speaks to, again, something that maybe was behind the scenes or that wasn't necessarily available. And because Neptune's in the 10th house, did you have something happen with like your early career? I mean, you don't have to speak to this if you're not comfortable. I didn't mean to like.
Well, early career. So I'm actually trained as a marriage and family therapist, and then I became very clear that the lifestyle attached to that more traditional role or profession was not a fit for me. So that's actually what led me to coaching. In the process, it was incredibly disorienting, scary, confronting. I mean, ultimately, it's been incredible. I've been with HCS for like 7 years-ish. So it's like one release led to this chapter. It was a major confrontation of my identity because I'd invested so much in that idea and that learning. But it was not a match for me to be, in a desk, behind a desk, that lifestyle. So that was my first and only, career.
Well, it makes a lot of sense given that your moon is there. Marriage and family, Libra is the sign of marriage and family. So the fact that your moon is there and again, this is like a conscious energy, it seems like that you brought forth and you really had to think about changing. So good for you. There's always supports also. These little blue lines give you your support system or you're out. So there are two things that to know about a chart. If you see a red line, understand that it is an opportunity for growth. And it sounds like for you, Darcy, it was a revelation, but it led to a better experience in your 10th house, which is career. But two things to know about any planetary energy that might seem a little bit challenging or have red lines going from it. The first is the house that it's in, always the opposite of that house provides balance. So for you, Darcy, that would be any kind of spirituality, meditation practice, any kind of connection to a higher source is the counterbalancing energy to, these emotions, any emotions that might come up actually around your career. The other thing is if there's a blue line as well as a red line, sometimes that gives you what I lovingly call an out. So an energy that you can explore to counterbalance the challenging situation. So for you, actually, learning, especially higher learning and structure with that higher learning, because it's Saturn actually provides a little bit of comfort. So it's almost like I was doing this thing for a career, but you know what? I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get this other degree. And once I do that, I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to take all these lessons that I've learned and I'm going to make good use of it, good practical use of it. So those would be a couple of things that stand out right away. The last thing I always like to point out is the midhaven. And like I said, every chart's a little bit different, but the midhaven is what I actually think of as your soul's legacy, what you came in to do. So if there is one thing that could encompass that, and I think it's the whole chart, but holistically, it would be your midhaven. And yours is at 3 in Capricorn. And what that indicates is that you came in to actually have a substantial career that makes a difference and impact and that you believe in. So something that you have that you do every day that has a structure to it, but also is something that empowers you and that you believe in. The two have to come together in order for you to feel like you're living on purpose. And the key to, of course, finding it for you is that that North Node where you're continually brought back to self-development so that you understand that those two things are aligned, that your belief system and the career of choice. So did you have any questions? I could talk about your oppositions and stuff like that, but I feel like that's a lot. So
Oh my gosh, you were just so much fun. And I'm thinking about how, what you said earlier, how affirming and confirming this can be. And like Michelle spoke to with a lot of our clients, um, there's a lack of self-trust around things that do feel really intuitive and that like this kind of comes naturally, but is it okay? You know, looking for this outer validation where the world can't really give it, or it's not very supportive long term to rely on the world. But with this, it's like looking in a mirror and having you help me, you know, wipe the glass clean or see it, understand it. And it's really encouraging. I find it delightful. And as my chart shows, the learning is just so much fun. And I really appreciate how you point out some of the different, like some of the variety of ways to see this. So there's no one way. And that's where I've seen many people either have fear around looking at astrology or taken a more masculine approach, you know, and I know you saying with the feminine that there's really the intuition. So I'm just really thankful, and I'm definitely going to look back at this. I took some notes, but this will be recorded, so I'll listen again. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for sharing your experience. That's always very meaningful for me. I would say you brought up a really, really good point too, and that is intuition versus the structures that we're kind of used to as far as evidence-based proof. And each of these signs, aspects, degrees have information, just like anything that we look at. But one of the tenets of my philosophy of being is that there is also that intuitive sense that they're just starting to find evidence behind how we can't measure it yet, or we're starting to measure it with quantum physics, but that it is something that is valid for people. It's a different way of looking at things, but to me, and trust me, I look at evidence-based medicine all day, it's equally valid, just in different ways. So thanks for bringing that up.
Do you have time for some Emily?
Sure, I've got some Emily time. Emily, did you want to bring yours up? If you already have it, I'll stop sharing. Or do you?
Yeah,
I can.
either way is fine, but let me pull this up
So
and
Darcy, like
share.
just for the viewers, like how do you feel kind of getting, I mean, you just got like even just a little bit of information. Like how did you leave feeling with that input from Kristy?
Curious,
Mhm.
validated, and reflective. Like I get to pause and just like check in with, does that feel right for me? Or what does that ask me to pause and look closer into, which I think is invaluable to have this invitation to connect inside from a really curious place where very often there can be criticism about, you know, by looking inside. Um, and it's fun. It's a new language. I don't have to study to understand because someone's translating it for me.
Amazing. And I always say, like, the best way, people ask me this sometimes, what's the best way to learn astrology? And I would say, a lot of people, again, go through that kind of systematic approach, like learn your sun sign, then your ascending, and then your moon. I say learn what fascinates you the most. So if you want to know what keeps you on your path, look at your North Node and investigate that. If you want to know about your life's purpose and legacy, take a look at where your midhaven is, what sign that is, and do a little research there. You'll find something new comes up all the time, over 3,000 aspects. So lots of opportunity to learn stuff. But that's the way I would approach it. Oh, look at you. Look at you, Emily. You've got all the stuff leaning to one side. Which is great. They actually talk about different quadrants. So, 3 quadrants of sign, 3 quadrants of sign, 3 quadrants of that sign, 3 quadrants of sign. And it has a lot to do with, really focusing on the world up here or focusing on self-development and how that impacts the world in the lower half of the expression. And then also how you express. So if you maybe are looking at your impact on the world, for example, while meditating, it might be on this half of the chart. If you are looking at the world and your impact while meditating with a group, it might be on this side of the world. So lots of self-development energies, which, blaringly come out whenever you look at this chart, but working with others in order to make that kind of thing happen is the first thing that just jumps out at me whenever I look at your chart. The other is it's very interesting that your North Node is at 0. And we have another North Node. It looks like in Aries. Nope, it's actually in Taurus. Taurus at 0 degrees. So Taurus is the sign that encompasses security, whatever that means for you, developing great self-worth. And because it's at 0 degrees, it's a lot about developing really some deep boundaries around that. What keeps you on track is probably your mysticism, though. A lot of stuff that shows up in the
Michelle. She's just like, yep.
The 8th house represents a lot of good stuff for your listeners. The 8th and 12th houses would be the 2 houses I would say show up as either traumas or mysticism. So someone kind of looking beyond the veil. The 8th house is nice because you get to choose. Sometimes with the 12th house, for example, you might have nightmares, for example, things that come back to you from your childhood. With the 8th house, you can be like, I'm not having those anymore. And especially with Taurus, because it's more of a, I don't want to say it's a stubborn energy. It's like a methodical energy, and it's very intentional, how I want to put it. So you can intentionally say, okay, I'll have a little bit more of this looking beyond the veil, or I'm done with that for now. I need my me time kind of thing. And also, is interesting is in Aries, which is an interesting energy in the 8th house. So Venus, we didn't talk about before. Of course, traditionally, that's the planet of love and relationships, but it's also your creativity. So I imagine you have a good amount of projects or things that you're interested in all at once as well, exploring. Because it's 25, it's likely that it is something kind of a spiritual ilk. So like I'm going to be Reiki certified, but I'm also going to get my certification in astrology, for example, and know both of those things. That's that Aries energy. And it's interesting because, Mars rules Aries. That's kind of the counterpart, Mars versus Venus, that we look at and talk about. So there's a balancing energy there. You're wanting to create lots of things, but there's an energy in Aries behind actually making those things come to fruition, which is really nice and supportive. Because it's the 8th house, it's deep exploration. Venus kind of likes being in Scorpio, but it's a very deep and kind of passionate exploration. So I imagine those projects mean a good deal to you, that you have a good deal of heart that you put into those projects, which is really lovely. We also didn't talk about stelliums, which is 3 or more planetary energies in one pie piece. And that means that it's a focus of your awareness, of your consciousness that your soul signed up for. So for you, Emily, I would imagine that community is really big for you. Creating community and any kind of relationships, a good, stable home where you can make that community happen. And I always say the 4th house, they say, oh, it's your family, but it can be your chosen family too. And it can be the way that you build community. Excuse me. And so your Mars is here. We were just talking about Mars and how that's your motivation for action. So community action is the big thing, and it's in Capricorn. So you're going to make that work in a practical way. Very interesting too that your Neptune is here. That can be the planet of dreams, spirituality. So for example, you're, your listeners might look at somebody with nightmares, find out where their Neptune is. That might give them more information. In Emily's case, it probably represents spirituality and a career in spirituality where you're creating community for others, and really creating thoughtful, mindful ways of people enabling that in a practical way that they can use. So I'm picturing like step-by-step ways to do that in a very thoughtful and supportive way. So those are some of the things. I know we're getting close to time. Emily, I could talk a long time, so just message me later if you want to hear more. But do you have any
Okay.
questions?
No,
Any
that's
of that
so
resonate?
absolutely. I loved having my chart regs. I've had it a couple times, and everyone's different, unique qualities. That's like what they focus on is always interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people focus on my big three because they're intense. And then I've had people look at like, oh, do you see your Chiron and your Midhaven are the same? And so like going to that route, and it's just to like piggyback Darcy, it's so wonderful and just so like, yeah, what I had been feeling and thinking, it shows up in my soul's purpose because of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wonderful.
thank you.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, Darcy's a Gemini, and then Emily's Midhaven is in Gemini. So there's some alignment there, but it's, all about communication. And you should write a book. That's what it's saying. You should write a book as your legacy.
That's amazing. Well, actually, we could stop sharing this as we wrap up here. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I feel like I want to talk to you forever, Kristy.
Same. And Emily and Darcy,
Mhm.
thank you so much for sharing your chart with us. It's really a
Yeah.
privilege and a gift. And I don't take that lightly. I appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to share with us, Kristy, before we wrap up in terms of the people out there that are going to be interested in reaching you? We're going to be able to put your website and your information next to the video, so we'll be able to kind of connect them up with you. Is there anything else that you want to share?
I would say most of the information about me is on my website, so feel free to take a peek there. You can book a reading there if you're interested in doing that. Small, medium, or large, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever works for you or resonates for you. And I would say Emily's point about finding an astrologer you resonate is very similar to finding a therapist that you resonate with. Not every astrologer is going to work. I'm not going to work for everybody. That's not going to be the approach that everyone loves. So find one that you connect and resonate with and that supports you in whatever goals that you are looking for. I think that that's really important.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you again for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.